Before we even begin, viewer guidance is strongly advised. This report is for informational and entertainment purposes only. But what you're about to hear shook the courtroom, and possibly the country, to its core. As the trial against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs reached its midpoint, few could have predicted what would happen next. The courtroom, once buzzing with the usual courtroom murmurs, suddenly froze in silence as the assistant U.S. attorney approached the judge's bench. She wasn't just carrying a folder, she was carrying the weight of a revelation that would reach the highest levels of American political power. The folder was marked, Executive Correspondence, and its contents were about to change everything. Inside were documents detailing communications between Diddy and former President Barack Obama. The courtroom gasped. Even the judge, typically a pillar of neutrality, showed visible surprise. Diddy, usually calm and composed, suddenly went pale. His eyes locked onto the documents as if he already knew what they contained, and feared their exposure. The prosecution's voice was steady and sharp. She announced that the U.S. government intended to present these communications, spanning over a decade, from 2012 to 2023. The defense jumped up instantly. Objection. The evidence hadn't been included in prior discovery. It was sensationalism, they claimed. But the prosecution clarified that this evidence had come from a separate federal investigation and had only just been cleared for use. The judge, after a tense sidebar, allowed the presentation, with redactions for national security. As Diddy gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his attorney whispered frantically into his ear. The jury leaned forward. The gallery held its breath. The next witness was called. Michael Harris, a former White House aide who had served as a special assistant to President Obama from 2009 to 2017. He looked composed, but beneath that calm exterior, there was tension. He confirmed that in his role, he had multiple interactions with Diddy, then elaborated. Initially, Diddy's involvement with the Obama administration had seemed ordinary. He was, after all, a celebrity and philanthropist, publicly supporting initiatives like youth engagement and education reform. But according to Harris, by 2012, Diddy's role had evolved. He wasn't just a supporter, he was now a key influencer with access to private phone numbers and direct contact with senior staff. Emails presented in court revealed internal White House concerns about Diddy's growing influence. But those concerns, Harris testified, were ultimately brushed aside. The reason? Diddy's massive financial contributions during the re-election campaign. The prosecution then steered Harris to a specific incident from 2013. Diddy had requested a private meeting with President Obama. That wasn't unusual for major donors. What was unusual was Diddy's insistence that the meeting not appear on official visitor logs. Harris confirmed that the meeting was granted, off the record, inside the White House map room. Harris couldn't testify to what was discussed, but noted that immediately after the meeting, senior staff began pushing forward certain trade provisions. Those provisions directly benefited companies with ties to Diddy's international manufacturing interests. The dates aligned too perfectly to ignore. Then came the most explosive testimony so far. Harris revealed that in 2016, he had overheard a phone call between Diddy and a high-ranking White House official. Diddy had allegedly asked for intervention in a federal investigation tied to one of his business ventures, and in that call, Harris claimed, Diddy referenced their arrangement, telling the official that this issue needs to disappear. Shortly after that call, the investigation in question was reassigned and later shelved. Harris also referenced a disturbing request from Diddy that same year. He wanted diplomatic credentials. Why? Because diplomatic immunity would shield him while traveling to countries with extradition treaties. Although the State Department initially pushed back, by early 2017, just before the administration change, Diddy was quietly appointed to a limited cultural ambassador role, granting him access and protection in 3 nations. The prosecution's strategy was clear. They weren't just portraying Diddy as a criminal. They were painting him as a manipulator of political power. And now, the case wasn't just about abuse, trafficking, or financial crimes. It was about the collapse of systems that had enabled these crimes to continue, unchallenged, for years. The next witness intensified this collapse. Jennifer Richardson, the former financial compliance officer for Combs Enterprises, was sworn in. She had been silent for too long, she said. But not anymore. Richardson's voice didn't tremble. She had relocated her family, changed her name, and built a new life, but nothing could erase what she had seen. She began by explaining her initial duties: monitoring finances, ensuring compliance with tax laws, securities regulations, and standard business practices. Everything had seemed above board at first. But then, in 2015, she was asked to structure a series of donations to the Obama Foundation and various political action committees. On the surface, the causes looked noble: education, criminal justice reform. But when Richardson examined the transactions more closely, the truth emerged. The funds weren't coming directly from Diddy or his company. Instead, they passed through a maze of at least 12 shell companies and third-party entities. Most were based in jurisdictions known for financial secrecy. Richardson presented a flowchart showing how the money moved, carefully designed to mask its origin and to avoid legal limits on campaign contributions. In 2016, Richardson discovered a second, hidden set of financial books. They were encrypted and tucked away on a secure server. These books showed unreported cash transactions that matched the dates of Diddy's meetings with political figures. She began tracking a new internal project called Oversight. Its purpose, she testified, was clear: to use political leverage to neutralize legal and regulatory threats to Diddy's empire. Emails referenced intervention in SEC probes, customs delays, and efforts to manage what they called problematic witnesses. Then came another stunning revelation. In early 2017, Richardson had been ordered to set up a private foundation that would funnel money into a new initiative within the Obama Foundation. The deal gave Diddy veto rights over advisory board appointments and guaranteed him access to elite-level political events. Even after Obama left office, Diddy's connection to his network remained strong. Richardson explained that this access wasn't about philanthropy. It was insurance. For a man facing mounting legal threats, political access meant safety. But the most damning moment of the morning came when Richardson revealed she had recorded a conversation between Diddy and his chief legal counsel. In it, Diddy boasted that Obama owed him. He said one call from Obama could make an investigation disappear, just like others had before. Richardson knew then that she couldn't remain silent. She feared for her safety, so she began documenting everything: financial records, emails, recordings, and more. She stored backups in secure locations, ready to be handed over to authorities if anything happened to her. The prosecution showed photos of her attending events with both Diddy and Obama. She described private conversations, carefully cleared rooms, and subsequent strategy meetings where Diddy's legal team discussed new protections they had secured. At one 2018 event, she overheard Diddy informing Obama about a containment issue. Obama, she said, looked uncomfortable but promised someone would look into it. Days later, a federal investigation into labor abuses at one of Diddy's manufacturers was reassigned and then quietly closed. By this point in the trial, the courtroom atmosphere had completely transformed. What started as a celebrity case had become a shocking exposé of power and influence. Even the jury, once passive observers, now looked intensely focused, connecting dots between fame, politics, and a legal system that had been manipulated from behind the scenes. As Richardson detailed her decision to come forward, she looked directly at Diddy. She said that by staying silent, she would be complicit in future harm. And she wasn't willing to live with that. The courtroom wasn't just listening anymore. It was reckoning. And for the first time, Diddy's calm was cracking. Not with anger, but with fear. Because now, his carefully crafted fortress was under siege. And this time, not even a presidential connection might be enough to save him. As the courtroom settled after the first wave of bombshells, a chill lingered in the air. Everyone now understood. This wasn't just a case about Diddy. It was about the power structures that had protected him for years. And the next few hours of testimony would dig even deeper into that hidden world. Jennifer Richardson remained on the stand. She hadn't flinched through hours of cross-examination. Her words were clear, her evidence damning, and she was far from done. The prosecutor returned with more documents: internal communications from Combs Enterprises, project files, personal memos. Each piece painted a picture of how Diddy's influence wasn't accidental. It was strategic, planned, and politically protected. Richardson explained how Project Oversight expanded rapidly between 2016 and 2018. What had begun as a few discreet favors evolved into a full-blown covert strategy. Internal emails outlined objectives like neutralizing press exposure, blocking subpoenas, and maintaining political cover through high-value donations. In one message, a staffer referenced upcoming legislation that could impact digital royalties. The directive was clear: schedule a private dinner with a key senator's team, offer campaign support, and secure their stance. Another thread involved outreach to a nonprofit aligned with the Obama Foundation, requesting they promote certain community initiatives that conveniently mirrored Diddy's branding efforts. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Richardson explained how these efforts weren't just about business. They were about control. She described a specific sequence of events following the 2017 Foundation agreement: private meetings in New York penthouses, closed-door sessions in Los Angeles, trips abroad, all aligned with regulatory pressure points and looming investigations. The prosecutor then introduced something unexpected: a voice memo from a senior executive inside Combs Enterprises. In it, the executive expressed concerns that the company was moving too far into political manipulation territory. He warned that certain moves could trigger federal scrutiny. According to Richardson, the response from leadership was chilling. The executive was reassigned, and a new internal directive was circulated: no emails about project oversight. Verbal only, in person or through secured channels. The prosecution presented timeline charts showing how certain investigations had quietly disappeared just after meetings with political intermediaries. One particularly disturbing entry linked a financial audit from the Department of Labor to a private golf event attended by both Diddy and a former senior official from the Obama administration. Richardson's expression remained steady. She said it was no longer about protecting an artist or a brand. It was about protecting a network. And that network wasn't limited to entertainment. It reached into law firms, lobbying groups, nonprofits, tech companies, and political offices. The prosecutor then turned to the most controversial area: blackmail and leverage. Richardson testified that in her final year at Combs Enterprises, she became aware of a digital archive stored off-site. She wasn't given direct access, but one day, due to a security misconfiguration, she saw folder names that made her blood run cold. Folders named with dates, locations, initials, video backups, private correspondence, encrypted files. She took screenshots, then reported the incident to her superior. Instead of an investigation, she received a warning. Her access was revoked, and she was reassigned to a satellite office. She understood the message: stay silent or be erased. The prosecutor asked what she believed the archive contained. Richardson said she couldn't be sure, but based on references in internal documents, it likely held sensitive material gathered from private events: photos, videos, recordings, potentially compromising information about guests. Then came a second witness who added weight to these claims. Jason Myers, a former digital security consultant for Combs Enterprises, took the stand. He was nervous but composed. He confirmed that he had helped build the security infrastructure for what was internally referred to as the vault. Myers explained that the vault was designed to store data backups, legal files, and high-value assets. But over time, it became something else. He recalled being instructed to implement biometric locks, triple-tiered encryption, and remote wipe triggers. When asked why such precautions were necessary, Myers hesitated, then said the content being stored included material that could be used in legal or political leverage scenarios. The courtroom reacted sharply to this phrase. The judge called for order. Myers continued, describing how he was eventually pushed out after he refused to disable certain access logs. Those logs, he claimed, would have shown who accessed the vault and when. After his departure, he received multiple calls from unknown numbers, some warning him to stay quiet, others simply breathing into the phone. He filed a report with local authorities, but nothing came of it. Back on the stand, Richardson resumed her testimony. She described a disturbing pattern of internal communication around high-profile guests. Attendees at Diddy's parties were often selected based on political or financial utility. Background checks were run. Sometimes, private investigators were hired to dig deeper. These guests were then seated near key influencers. Alcohol flowed. Cameras were carefully hidden. And the next day, post-event memos summarized what had been observed. Richardson had seen one of those memos accidentally left on a printer. It detailed a senator's behavior at a private afterparty. The memo included timestamps, drink counts, and specific conversations. It was then, she said, that she realized this wasn't just about influence, it was about insurance. The prosecutor asked whether this information was ever weaponized. Richardson responded that she couldn't confirm its use, but in several cases where individuals turned against Diddy or refused cooperation, sudden scandals emerged. She listed a former reporter, a business partner, and a nonprofit executive, all of whom had faced unexpected personal or professional crises after challenging Combs' enterprises. The gallery sat motionless. Everyone in that room could feel the gravity of what they were hearing. But the story wasn't over. Richardson then pulled out a thin black ledger, the same one she had referenced during her opening testimony. She held it up, explaining that it contained handwritten records from her final year. Notes that couldn't be altered digitally. She had kept this copy hidden, even from her own family, until the day she turned it over to federal prosecutors. Inside were lists of dates, amounts, initials, and notes. References to meetings with political figures. Instructions to structure payments. Comments about who to invite or exclude from specific events. One entry from late 2018 stood out. It referenced a scheduled appearance by a high-profile political figure at a fundraising gala. Alongside the date were instructions. Record clean. Multiple angles. Ensure legal team has access. The prosecutor paused, then asked the most important question yet. Was President Obama aware of the full extent of Diddy's network? Richardson responded carefully. She said she had no proof of Obama's knowledge of the manipulation, but she believed he knew more than he let on. She recounted moments where Obama's body language shifted during certain interactions, where conversations suddenly stopped when staff entered the room, and where follow-up meetings with legal teams occurred immediately after Obama-related events. The defense objected, claiming speculation. The judge sustained, but the damage had been done. Jurors were already connecting dots, and the media, watching from overflow rooms, was preparing headlines that would soon reach every corner of the country. By now, Diddy's expression had changed. The confident mogul was gone. What remained was a man watching his empire burn from the inside. As the prosecution wrapped up the day, the courtroom remained in heavy silence. The next session promised more witnesses, more evidence, and possibly a direct link between the vault and specific acts of obstruction. But even without that final piece, the case had already transformed. What began as a celebrity trial had now implicated the foundations of American power, the alliances between wealth, entertainment, and political protection. And for those who had once felt untouchable, the message was becoming clear. The shield is cracking. The next morning, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Reporters arrived early. Federal agents took quiet positions in the back rows. And outside, protesters and supporters alike stood behind barricades, holding signs that spoke to both outrage and disbelief. The world was watching what had started as a celebrity trial, and it now stood on the edge of becoming a national reckoning. Inside, Jennifer Richardson returned to the stand. There were bags under her eyes, but her voice didn't waver. She wasn't just testifying anymore, she was exposing a system. The prosecution opened the day with one question. Beyond financial schemes and influence campaigns, did Mr. Combs use his political connections to actively interfere with criminal investigations? Richardson nodded. She began explaining a meeting that had taken place in early 2019. It was held in a discreet conference room within a private hotel in D.C. Attendees included senior members of Combs Enterprises and a former advisor tied to the Obama administration. On the agenda, an investigation into trafficking allegations that had begun gaining quiet traction. The meeting focused on three things: media strategy, contact with specific government offices, and framing the public narrative. A memo was distributed at the meeting. Richardson had seen it. The title was short: Firewall. The document outlined how to use philanthropic partnerships, racial justice initiatives, and selective media interviews to deflect attention. One section focused on how to reframe allegations as politically motivated attacks. Another part detailed which political allies might be contacted for support if the case advanced. Richardson paused and glanced at the jury. This wasn't just reputation management, it was preemptive containment. The prosecution then introduced a redacted phone log showing multiple calls between Diddy and a member of Congress during that same month. The timing coincided with a request from prosecutors to interview one of Diddy's associates. The request was later rescinded. No reason was given. Then came the real turning point. A secure email chain between Diddy's legal team and external consultants showed that a plan was being developed to monitor key witnesses. Not just monitor, but gather leverage. One entry mentioned tracking social media activity, financial stress, and potential personal weaknesses. Richardson identified the internal term used for this program, MirrorNet. It was a shadow operation within the company. MirrorNet was tasked with identifying anyone, employees, ex-partners, journalists, who could pose a threat to the network. Each target received a score. High-risk individuals were assigned handlers. Some were approached with offers. Others received warnings. The courtroom stirred. People glanced at each other. The idea of a company-led surveillance and pressure campaign shocked even the most seasoned observers. Richardson said she never participated directly, but she saw the logs. She read the summaries, and in 2020, when she decided to leave the company for good, she was warned that she'd signed more than just an NDA. She had signed what was internally called a loyalty contract. It included clauses about public statements, social media, and associations. Violating them, she was told, could result in aggressive legal action, or worse. The judge briefly paused the trial for recess. The air had grown too thick to breathe. When court resumed, the prosecution brought in one final surprise. An anonymous whistleblower, voice altered and identity sealed, testified remotely. The witness claimed to have worked for a private intelligence firm contracted by Combs Enterprises from 2016 to 2021. The firm's job wasn't just risk management, it was influence defense. According to the witness, the firm helped Diddy's team conduct background checks on prosecutors, dig into the pasts of journalists, and maintain what they called shield protocols. One protocol described how to strategically leak damaging stories about an accuser to undermine credibility before an investigation could progress. Another suggested ways to plant counter-narratives in friendly media circles. The whistleblower confirmed something chilling. The company kept scorecards, one for each threat. It tracked media influence, legal vulnerabilities, and political connections. Obama's name appeared in one of those scorecards, not as a threat, but as an asset. At this, the gallery erupted. The judge slammed the gavel and demanded order. But the damage wasn't just legal anymore, it had crossed into moral outrage. As the trial neared its end, Richardson asked to make a final statement. The judge allowed it. She stood, steady as ever, and looked at Diddy, not as an accuser, but as someone who had once believed in the system. She told the jury that she hadn't come forward to destroy a man. She had come forward because she realized how many others had been destroyed to protect him. She explained how she had watched artists manipulated, partners betrayed, and charities used as shields. She had seen deals made in quiet rooms, lives altered with a phone call, justice bent until it broke. She described how the Obama connection had been treated like a golden ticket, a relationship so sacred no one dared question it. But power used in silence, she said, becomes poison. And then she said something that made everyone lean in. She told the jury that if this case ended here, with Diddy alone, then nothing would change, because the network didn't begin with him, and it won't end with him unless others are held accountable too. Outside the courthouse, the world was no longer just watching, it was reacting. Media outlets exploded with coverage. Former officials issued statements. The Obama Foundation issued a clarification acknowledging donations but denying any improper influence. Political leaders from both parties called for further inquiry. Some suggested appointing a special investigator to look into what was now being called a pattern of political interference by private entities. Activists called it the awakening, a long overdue peeling back of how celebrity, money, and power intersect to create immunity. And inside the courtroom, Diddy sat motionless. He was no longer taking notes, no longer whispering to his attorney. He just stared ahead, his empire of connections collapsing around him. The judge announced the court would recess until final arguments. Jurors left quietly, their faces hard with contemplation. As the gallery emptied, Richardson remained seated for a moment longer. She glanced at the empty witness chair, then at the courtroom doors. And finally, she looked back one last time at the man who had once seemed invincible. Not anymore.